Every night at exactly 3:07 a.m., the phone at the front desk of the Redwood Inn rings. The call always comes from the same place, room 307, a room that burned down 5 years ago, a room that was sealed shut. But when the night clerk answers, a voice whispers through the static, "Please, open the door." The cameras show an empty hallway. So tell me, if no one is inside that room, who keeps calling?
The Redwood Inn stood alone along Route 66, about 20 miles outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The desert around it stretched endlessly, flat and silent, broken only by the sound of a wind scraping across dry earth. During the day, the motel looked tired but harmless. At night, it felt abandoned, even when every room was occupied. Daniel Harris had taken the night shift job 2 weeks earlier. 28 years old, recently divorced, needing money and distraction. The hours were simple: 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. minimal guests, minimal problems, mostly silence. Silence was what he wanted. The manager, Linda, had given him one unusual instruction on his first night. "Room 307 is sealed," she said flatly. "Electrical fire 5 years ago. A guest died. Insurance mess. We don't rent it. Don't open it."
"Don't send maintenance inside." Daniel assumed it was legal caution. Every old building had a story. He didn't ask more. The first few nights were uneventful. He drank coffee, watched security monitors, checked in the occasional trucker passing through. The cameras covered every hallway, every exit, the parking lot and the stairwell leading to the third floor. Room 307's hallway camera always showed the same thing: dim lights, faded wallpaper, and a closed door with a "Do Not Enter" sign hanging from the knob. On his fourth night at exactly 3:07 a.m., the desk phone rang. Daniel flinched. The sound felt too loud in the empty lobby. He answered casually. "Front desk, this is Daniel." Static filled the line, then faint breathing. Slow, uneven. "Hello?" he repeated. A whisper came through, so soft he almost missed it. "Please, open the door." The call disconnected. Daniel stared at the caller ID. Room 307. His chest tightened slightly. That had to be a system glitch. Maybe old wiring crossed signals internally. He reset the phone console and dismissed it. The next night at 3:07 a.m., it rang again. Room 307. He answered more cautiously. "Front desk." This time the whisper sounded clearer. "It's burning!" A faint crackling noise accompanied the voice, like distant fire chewing through wood. Daniel felt irritation rising. "This line is disconnected," he said firmly. "Stop calling." The whisper responded immediately. "You locked me in." The line went dead. Daniel did not sleep well that morning. On the 6th night, he prepared himself. He stood beside the phone at 3:06 a.m., watching the seconds tick forward. 3:07. The phone rang instantly. He picked it up before the second ring. "What do you want?" Breathing, then crying. Not loud sobbing, just quiet, exhausted weeping. "It's dark," the voice said. "I can't breathe." Daniel's throat felt dry. "There's no one in that room." A long pause, then, "You hear me every night." The words were no longer faint. They were closer, almost inside his ear. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded. Silence. Then the whisper shifted in tone. "Daniel." His blood went cold. He had never given his name. "How do you know that?" he asked. "You're next." The line disconnected. Daniel immediately checked the security monitors. The hallway outside room 307 looked normal. Still, empty. The "Do Not Enter" sign hung motionless. He told himself someone was playing a prank. Maybe an old staff member who knew the phone system. Maybe faulty wiring somehow looping archived recordings. He needed proof. The following night, when the phone rang again at 3:07 a.m., Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the monitor first. The hallway camera flickered. For just a split second, the image distorted into static, and then something appeared. A shape, darker than the shadows around it, standing directly in front of room 307. It wasn't solid. It had no defined edges, just a vertical distortion in the air. The phone continued ringing. Daniel answered slowly. "Front desk." The whisper was stronger now, clearer. "Open it." The shadow on the screen twitched unnaturally. "I can't," Daniel whispered. "You already did." All the monitors suddenly cut to black. The lobby lights flickered. 3 seconds later, everything came back online.
The hallway was empty. But something had changed. The "Do Not Enter" sign was now lying on the carpet. The door to 307 was slightly open, just an inch. Daniel's heart pounded violently. No one had passed the front desk. No one had used the stairs. The parking lot camera showed no movement. He swallowed hard and forced himself to breathe. He would not go upstairs. He repeated that to himself over and over. But at 3:07 a.m. the next night, the phone rang again. And this time, he could hear fire. By the 10th night, Daniel looked exhausted. Dark circles formed under his eyes. His hands trembled slightly even before the call came. 3:07 a.m. The phone rang. He answered without hesitation. "Front desk." The whisper was no longer weak. "You're standing too far away." His stomach dropped. "What?" "You're watching me." Daniel slowly lifted his eyes to the security monitor. The hallway camera showed smoke seeping from beneath room 307's door. Thick, black, rolling outward like a living thing. No fire alarms activated. No other cameras detected smoke. Only that hallway. "Help me," the voice pleaded. Then it changed, becoming layered, overlapping. "You left me. You locked it. You heard me." Daniel's breathing became shallow. His thoughts felt slow and heavy, like he was sinking underwater. He grabbed the master key from behind the desk. He didn't remember deciding to. His legs moved on their own. Up the stairs, down the third-floor hallway. The air grew colder with each step. The smell of ash filled his nose. Room 307's door stood slightly open. Smoke curled through the crack. The "Do Not Enter" sign lay torn on the floor. Daniel's hand hovered over the handle. The metal felt warm. He pushed the door open. The room was completely dark. No furniture, no visible damage. Just black walls stretching inward. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. The lock clicked. Instantly, the temperature changed. Heat pressed against his skin. The walls began blistering, paint bubbling violently. A low roar filled the room. Flames burst across the ceiling, and she appeared. A woman stood near the far wall. Her skin was burned and cracked, hair partially gone, eyes wide and unblinking. "You came," she said calmly. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It sounded normal, terrifyingly normal. "This happened years ago," Daniel said weakly. "I wasn't here." She tilted her head. "You always say that." The fire climbed higher. 3 more figures formed behind her in the flames, burned silhouettes, featureless, watching. The bedside phone began ringing loudly. Daniel turned slowly. An old rotary phone sat on a small melted table, still ringing. "Answer it," she said. He picked it up. On the other end, his own voice. "Please, open the door." Daniel dropped the receiver. The 4 burned figures stepped closer. "You replace us," they whispered together. The walls dissolved. Suddenly, Daniel was no longer inside the burning room. He was outside it. Watching through the hallway camera, watching himself standing inside surrounded by fire, the version of him inside began screaming. The flames swallowed him whole. Silence followed. Downstairs, the lobby camera showed Daniel entering room 307 alone at 3:07 a.m. At 3:14 a.m., the door opened. Daniel walked out calmly, expressionless. Behind him, 4 shadows followed. The next morning, Daniel Harris was officially reported missing. No body, no sign of struggle, just an empty night desk and a phone. That night, at exactly 3:07 a.m., it rang again. Caller ID, room 307. The new night clerk hesitated before answering. Front desk? Static. Then 5 voices whispered together. "Please, open the door." And somewhere inside room 307, a 6th voice began to cry. Deep in the foggy outskirts of Ohio lies a forgotten railroad, abandoned for decades, yet whispered about in fear. In 1920, a tragic train accident trapped dozens of souls, their screams lost to the night. Tonight, the tracks are silent, but some say if you listen closely, you can still hear the ghostly whistle and the footsteps of those who never left. This is the haunted railroad, where the past refuses to rest. In the quiet outskirts of Ohio, an abandoned railroad stretched like a scar across the landscape. Locals called it the Haunted Railroad, a name whispered with fear and unease. The legend began in 1920, when a tragic train accident claimed the lives of nearly 24 passengers. Over the decades,
Stories of ghostly figures, whispering voices, and phantom train whistles have kept people away. But some curiosity-driven souls can't resist venturing near. It was a foggy autumn evening when Thomas Miller, a young urban explorer and amateur photographer, decided to document the forgotten railroad. He had heard rumors from local tavern patrons about strange shadows moving along the tracks at night. Skeptical but intrigued, Thomas packed his camera, a flashlight, and his notebook, determined to capture evidence of the railroad's haunted reputation. As he approached the tracks, the air turned colder. The rusty rails creaked under the faint pressure of the wind, which carried an odd metallic scent. The trees lining the path seemed unnaturally still, their bare branches reaching like skeletal fingers into the mist. Thomas stopped for a moment, feeling a chill creep up his spine. "Just old tracks and overgrown weeds," he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the creeping fear. But the instant he stepped closer, a faint whistle echoed through the fog, soft, distant, and chilling. He froze. It was too high-pitched and fleeting to be any train. His heart beat faster, but curiosity pushed him onward. Thomas began to walk along the tracks, careful not to trip on the rotting wooden ties. He photographed the decaying railway signals and overgrown platforms, occasionally glancing around for movement. The stories had claimed that ghostly figures of passengers who died in the accident walked the tracks at night, eternally searching for the train that never returned. Thomas tried to dismiss it as superstition. Hours passed. The fog grew thicker, swallowing the tracks ahead and making it impossible to see more than 10 feet in any direction. Then he saw it. A shadowy figure, motionless, standing near the old crossing gate. At first, Thomas thought it was another explorer, but as he raised his camera, the figure seemed to flicker like static on an old television. He blinked, and it was gone. Unease replaced curiosity. Thomas walked faster, hoping to reach a safer, more open area, but then a low rumble resonated beneath his feet. It wasn't the earth shaking. He could feel it in the steel rails. Thomas turned his flashlight down the tracks and caught a glimpse of dim lights moving in the fog. At first, he thought it was a car in the distance, but the lights were moving along the tracks, gliding smoothly, silent except for the faint whistle echoing through the trees. The stories returned to his mind. The 1920 accident had trapped dozens of souls on this track, their bodies thrown from the train in the chaos. Witnesses at the time described screams carried by the wind, lights flickering along the tracks, and shadows that didn't belong to anyone alive. Could those spirits still linger here, tied to the rails where their lives ended? Thomas's flashlight flickered. For a brief moment, the mist seemed to part, revealing a group of indistinct shapes huddled on the tracks. They were wearing early 20th century clothing, hats, long coats, and dresses, but their faces were blurred, as if the fog itself was consuming them. They didn't move, yet Thomas felt them watching. He swallowed hard, every nerve screaming at him to run, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. Suddenly, one of the figures raised its arm, pointing down the track. Thomas shivered. Behind the figure, he thought he saw the faint outline of a train car emerging from the fog, though no tracks seemed to support its movement. The whistle pierced the night, growing louder, closer, yet there was still no sound of wheels on metal. He stumbled backward, dropping his camera. As he bent down to pick it up, he noticed the footprints along the gravel beside the tracks, hundreds of them, all facing forward, none returning. The footprints glowed faintly in the moonlight, eerily cold to the touch, as if walking alongside him. Thomas's fear became unbearable, but he couldn't leave. His curiosity demanded he see what came next. A cold gust of wind passed through, carrying whispers. They were fragmented words, almost unintelligible, but he could make out his name. "Thomas! Thomas!" He spun around, but the fog was empty. Still, the whispering continued, circling him, coming from all directions at once. His flashlight flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows of trees that seemed to twist toward him. Thomas ran, moving as fast as he could along the tracks, tripping over roots and debris. He felt a cold hand brush his shoulder, or perhaps it was just the wind, but the touch was unmistakable, icy and pressing. He didn't dare look back. Behind him, he could hear faint footsteps and a soft whistle following, keeping pace with him. Finally, he reached an old wooden trestle bridge over a shallow creek. The moonlight revealed the creek water flowing sluggishly,
black and reflecting the mist. Thomas stopped, gasping for air, and looked back. The fog seemed to gather, forming dozens of pale, ghostly faces that stared at him with hollow eyes. Their mouths opened, silent screams frozen in time. For the first time, Thomas understood. The haunted railroad wasn't just a story. It wasn't a trick of the light nor the wind. The spirits of the 1920 accident were still here, bound to the rails, trapped in a loop of their final moments. And tonight, they had noticed him. He fled into the trees, leaving the tracks behind, but the whistle followed. Growing fainter, then vanishing, the shadows melted back into the fog. Thomas collapsed against a tree, trembling, and whispered a promise he didn't fully believe. He would never return to the haunted railroad. Yet, as he made his way back to the nearest road, he noticed something chilling. The footprints continued off the tracks, following him into the trees, fading slowly, as if watching, waiting.
Thomas didn't sleep that night. The images of ghostly faces and endless footprints haunted his mind. By morning, rationality had returned, or so he told himself. But the pull of the railroad was irresistible. He needed answers. He had to know what had really happened on that foggy night of 1920 and why the spirits had followed him. By noon, Thomas drove back to the outskirts of Ohio, the abandoned railroad stretching silently before him. The mist hadn't lifted. In fact, it seemed thicker, almost deliberately waiting, wrapping the tracks in a shroud of gray. He parked his car at the old crossing and stepped out, camera in hand. The air was colder than he remembered. His breath formed small clouds, drifting away into the fog. This time, Thomas was determined. He carried a notebook filled with research, old newspaper clippings, witness accounts and photographs of the accident scene. According to the records, the train had derailed on a curve, tipped into a shallow ravine, and caught fire. Most victims had been thrown clear. Others trapped in the cars had perished in the flames. But a few, eyewitnesses said, had vanished entirely. Those were the souls rumored to haunt the tracks. Thomas walked slowly, each step careful, the wooden ties groaning beneath his weight. The faint whistle returned almost immediately, drifting through the fog. It was closer this time, insistent, almost calling him by name. His heartbeat surged. The shadows at the edge of his vision seemed to move of their own accord, and then he saw them. A row of ghostly figures emerged from the mist, lining the tracks ahead. There were men and women in early 1920s clothing. Faces pale and featureless, bodies swaying slightly as though caught in a gentle current. Some held suitcases, one clutched a small child. Their eyes, or the hollow impressions where eyes should be, locked on him. Thomas raised his camera, but the figures didn't fade this time. They approached, gliding along the tracks with no sound of feet on gravel. The whistle grew louder, echoing through the fog, vibrating in his chest. He could see flames flicker from the ghostly train car that followed them, as if the fire that had killed them still burned, suspended in time. One of the figures, a woman holding a suitcase, reached toward him, arm outstretched, fingers elongated and translucent. Thomas froze, unable to move. Her voice came then, not a whisper but a clear, resonant tone. "Help us! Help us get back!" The words pierced his mind. Thomas realized the spirits weren't malevolent. They were trapped, unable to move on. The railroad had become a prison. The derailment had bound their souls to the rails, reliving the horror night after night. The whistle, the shadows, the ghostly train, it was their loop of torment. Gathering courage, Thomas spoke aloud. I want to help. Tell me what to do." The figures paused. The whistle stopped abruptly, leaving a suffocating silence. Then, one man, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His clothes were tattered, face scorched, eyes hollow but piercing. He pointed down the tracks toward an old signal tower, barely standing, leaning at an odd angle. Thomas understood. The tower must have been the source of the lingering energy, perhaps where the fire started, where the train had gone off the rails. If he could investigate it, maybe he could set things right, or at least release the spirits. Carefully, he moved toward the tower, the fog pressing in from all sides. The ghostly figures followed silently, hovering just beyond reach, guiding him. The wooden stairs creaked under his weight as he climbed, each step threatening to give way. At the top, he saw remnants of the original fire, charred beams, twisted metal, and a faint, smoky glow. Thomas placed his hands on the scorched wood. He remembered the newspaper accounts. Survivors had tried to extinguish the fire with buckets of water, but the flames were uncontrollable. Something in the fire, he realized, had trapped the souls. A ritual, unintentional or accidental, bound them to the scene. Closing his eyes, Thomas whispered a plea. "I release you. Go in peace. Leave this place behind." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped sharply and the fog thickened, forming swirling figures of the passengers. The whistle blew one final time, loud, mournful and resonant, echoing across the valley. The ghostly train appeared, a shimmering silhouette behind the passengers. Slowly, the figures turned and walked onto the train, faces now peaceful, expressions softened, no longer hollow. The train moved forward along the tracks, fading into the mist. Thomas stepped back, trembling, watching as the last of the ghostly train vanished. The fog began to lift, the wind returning to a natural breeze. Silence settled over the abandoned railroad. No whispering, no shadows, no haunting presence. The spirits were gone. He descended from the tower, feeling exhausted but relieved. The tracks, once menacing and eerie, now seemed empty.
Ordinary, as if history had finally been laid to rest. Thomas collected his camera, checked his notes, and walked back to his car. As he drove away, he didn't glance back, though the image of the ghostly train burned in his mind. That night, in his apartment, Thomas reviewed the photographs he had taken. Most were blurred, foggy, unrecognizable, but one image remained clear. It was a single figure on the tracks, smiling faintly, hat tipped forward as if thanking him. He put the camera down, heart racing. He knew he had witnessed the afterlife of a tragedy, and he had survived to tell it. The haunted railroad was silent now, but Thomas also knew something else. Some places, some tragedies, never truly disappear. The tracks might be empty, the whistles gone, but the echoes of those who suffered, their memories,
And the pain of the unresolved lingered in the mist. And if anyone else dared to approach, the stories would begin again. Thomas never returned, but he wrote the story down, shared it with researchers, and kept the legend alive, not to scare, but to honor those who had been trapped on that night long ago. The haunted railroad had finally found some peace, for now. Deep in the forests of New England lies broken Grimsby, a village abandoned by time, haunted by shadows of the past, where whispers call your name, lanterns flicker in the fog, and every step you take is watched. Those who enter rarely return, and those who do are never the same. Tonight, the village waits, and it knows you are coming. The New America forests were silent as Jack Mercer drove along the winding dirt road leading to the remnants of Grimsby. He had read stories, seen photographs, and even heard the warnings from locals. Don't go there after dark. But curiosity had always been stronger than fear. Jack was a historian and writer, fascinated by old villages and the secrets they held. He wanted to document broken Grimsby before it disappeared completely, buried by nature and time. The village appeared on the horizon just as the sun began to dip behind the mountains. Broken rooftops poked through the dense fog creeping along the ground. Trees, gnarled and twisted, leaned over the streets like silent sentinels. Jack parked his car at the edge of the overgrown main path and stepped out, feeling the chill of the evening. His flashlight, camera, and notebook were all he had, but he sensed already that they would not be enough to face whatever still lingered here. Crossing the old stone bridge into the village, Jack noticed the smell immediately. Smoky, decayed, and strangely metallic. It reminded him of old crematoriums he had visited in Europe, but here it was alive, pressing against his lungs. He stepped carefully on the moss-covered stones. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it sounds that might have been footsteps, but there was no one in sight. Jack made his way to the remains of the town inn. Its doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, the floorboards creaked underfoot, and dust motes floated like tiny ghosts in the beam of his flashlight. Broken furniture lay scattered across the room, and what appeared to be a torn curtain swayed though there was no breeze. A sense of being watched crawled over his skin. As Jack raised his camera to photograph the inn, he saw movement at the far end of the room. A shadow passed, elongated and unnatural, as if something was stretching toward him. His voice trembled as he called out, "Hello?"
Only silence answered. He approached slowly, heart hammering. The shadow vanished, leaving behind a faint odor of smoke mixed with wet soil. Jack exhaled shakily and pressed on. The old church at the center of the village drew him next. Once, it had been the heart of Grimsby's community, but now only broken walls and toppled pews remained. Gravestones were half sunk in the earth, worn and unreadable. Jack walked among them, documenting every detail, and felt the whispers begin. Faint voices murmured in the language of the past, rising from the soil beneath his feet. He froze, straining to hear them clearly, but their words were indecipherable, only the tone carrying a sense of urgent warning. The mansion on the hill, the largest structure in broken Grimsby, loomed over the village. Once home to the wealthiest family in the area, it now sat abandoned, roof caved in and windows like dark hollow eyes. Jack approached, flashlight scanning the walls, revealing scratch marks along the siding as though something had fought to escape, or perhaps to keep him out. He opened the front door, missing entirely, and stepped inside. The air inside was thick and cold. The floorboards creaked and groaned beneath his weight. Along the walls, shadows seemed to shift independently of the light. One room held a blackened fireplace. In the corner sat a single child's shoe, dust-free, oddly out of place, as if it had just been left there moments ago. Jack photographed it, hands shaking. He sensed something watching him just beyond the edge of the light. Midnight struck. The silence of the mansion was broken by soft, deliberate footsteps above him. Jack's flashlight flickered, then died, leaving him in darkness. The steps stopped suddenly. Then came the whisper, carried from the shadows. "Leave, before it's too late." Jack spun around, searching for an exit. The front door was gone, replaced by a wall of peeling wallpaper and shadow. Hallways twisted around him, each turn leading to rooms that seemed familiar yet different from the last. Faces appeared on the walls for a fleeting second. Screaming, distorted, impossible. Jack ran, camera swinging wildly. Tripping over loose boards, barely maintaining his balance, he found himself in the mansion courtyard, breath ragged, chest tight. Fog swirled around his feet, and the faint glow of lanterns flickered where no lanterns should have been. Whispering voices merged into a cacophony, guiding him, or perhaps trapping him. Jack fled through the overgrown paths, never once looking back. Behind him, the mansion remained still, yet somehow alive, waiting, patient, and hungry for the next curious soul. By dawn, Jack had escaped the village, trembling and exhausted. Broken Grimsby lay quiet once more, silent but aware. He realized with a sickening dread that the village had not let him go. Something had followed him, though invisible, waiting for the right moment to claim him. The photographs he had taken showed fleeting figures, distorted faces, and shadows that moved independently, proof that the curse of broken Grimsby was far from over. Jack left the forest behind, but in his heart he knew the village did not release its victims lightly, and the whisper that had followed him all the way back to Boston haunted him more than the images in his camera ever could. Jack Mercer returned to Boston, but the memories of broken Grimsby clung to him like a second skin. His photographs, once meant to be proof of history, had become evidence of something far darker. In every shot, shadows shifted unnaturally. Faces appeared in corners where no one had stood. And in one photograph, the child shoe he had seen in the mansion sat in his own living room, dustless, as if waiting for him. He tried to convince himself it was a trick of the camera or his imagination. But every night, soft footsteps echoed in his apartment. Lantern lights flickered across the walls without cause, and faint whispers rose from the corners of his rooms. "You shouldn't have come back." Obsessed, Jack returned to research the village's history. Newspaper archives and town records told a grim tale. Fires had ravaged the mansion repeatedly in the 1800s. Children and adults had disappeared without trace. Witnesses had claimed shadowy figures that followed them home. Each tragedy seemed tied to the mansion on the hill, the heart of broken Grimsby's curse. Survivors' testimonies described a presence that watched, waited, and drew the curious toward it, feeding on fear and despair. Jack's obsession grew. He planned a return to the village, convinced that facing the source would end the curse. On a cold October evening, he drove back along the familiar dirt road, the forest thick with mist. By the time he reached the broken stone bridge, the wind carried voices again, distant but insistent, calling his name. He forced himself forward, ignoring the chill that gnawed at his bones. The mansion greeted him like a predator. Its roof was blackened, windows staring like empty eyes, and the walls seemed to pulse slightly, breathing with some unseen life. Inside, the air was colder than ever. Shadows shifted independently of his flashlight, forming shapes that grew taller, then collapsed, then reformed. The fireplace ignited on its own, casting flickering light across the room, revealing the child's shoe again, and a trail of small footprints leading up the stairs. Jack climbed the stairs, heart hammering, flashlight trembling. At the top, a hallway stretched infinitely, walls bending and shifting, impossible angles that should not exist. Whispers grew louder, now words he could understand. Join us. Never leave. Stay forever. Panic surged through him. He realized that the mansion was alive, conscious, aware of his intrusion. In the master bedroom, the walls were lined with portraits of the mansion's former residents, eyes blacked out, faces twisted in silent screams. The air thickened with the scent of smoke and decay. From the corner, a faint, high-pitched giggle echoed. The child whose shoe he had photographed appeared, not fully, a shadow of a child, translucent, reaching toward him. Jack turned to flee, but the hallway behind him had vanished. The mansion had reshaped itself. Rooms he had seen before now led to nowhere, walls closing in like a living thing. Shadows pressed against him, whispering, tugging at his clothes, circling his feet. He screamed, stumbling, falling through a trap door that seemed to open beneath him. He landed in the basement, damp and dark. Rusted medical instruments and broken furniture littered the floor. Here, the tragedy of broken Grimsby was laid bare. Remnants of fires, the soot-stained walls, and faint marks of desperate scratching, as if the trapped had fought to escape. Whispering voices now turned into agonized screams, echoing from the darkness. Jack could feel hands brushing against him, cold, insistent, yet intangible. Desperation drove him to climb the steps to the courtyard, but the mansion seemed endless. Hallways looping back on themselves, lantern lights flickered across the fog-covered graveyard outside, gravestones glowing faintly under the moonlight. Names of families long dead stared back at him. Children lost in fire, villagers vanished mysteriously, adults who had gone mad. Every grave seemed to pulse with a presence, restless, waiting for him. The child's shadow appeared again, this time joined by dozens of others. All reaching, all silent but urgent. Jack realized the truth of broken Grimsby. It was a living curse, not a place. It drew the curious to feed on their fear, reshaping reality around them, trapping them in a timeless nightmare. He ran blindly, tripping over roots and broken stones. Behind him, the whispers grew louder, screams rising, lantern lights spinning in impossible arcs. By some miracle, he reached the edge of the village as dawn broke. The forest seemed peaceful, but Jack knew it was a false calm. Broken Grimsby had let him escape for now, but it would not forgive his intrusion. Back in Boston, Jack's apartment was changed. Shadows lingered where none should exist. Objects from the mansion appeared in his home. Shoes, broken furniture, even the faint smell of smoke. At night, footsteps walked around his rooms. Lantern lights flickered in the darkness, and always the whisper, "You will return." Jack understood finally, with bone-deep fear, that broken Grimsby was not just a village. It was an entity, patient, eternal, feeding on the living curiosity of those who dared enter. And somewhere in the shadows, waiting for the next nightfall, it prepared to reclaim what it had almost lost, the historian who had dared uncover its secrets. No one knew exactly what happened to Jack Mercer after that. His notes and photographs remained terrifyingly clear, evidence of the horrors he had witnessed. But those who studied them claimed to hear faint whispers in their own homes, lights flickering, shadows moving when no one was there. Broken Grimsby's curse had grown, and it was still hungry. If these stories kept you up to night, make sure to like the video. Leave a comment telling me which one disturbed you the most, and subscribe for more true horror stories every week.